Chapter 6. Books. The physical side. The chief interest of many of my readers is avowedly books. They probably do, profess other interests, but they are primarily bookmen. And when one is a bookman during about 23 3/4 hours in every day. Now, bookmen are capable of understanding things about books which cannot be put into words. They're not like mere subscribers to circulating libraries. For them, a book is not just a book. It is a book. If these lines should happen to catch the eye of any persons not bookmen, such persons may imagine that I am writing nonsense, but I trust that the bookman will comprehend me. And I venture then to offer a few reflections upon an aspect of modern bookishness that is becoming more and more actual as the enterprise of publishers and the beneficent effects of education grow and increase together. I refer to popular editions of classics. Now, I am very grateful to the devisers of cheap and handy editions. The first book I ever bought was the first volume of the first modern series of presentable and really cheap reprints, namely Macaulay's Warren Hastings in Cassell's National Library, 6d. in cloth. That foundation stone of my library has unfortunately disappeared beneath the successive deposits. But another volume of the same series, F.T. Palgrave's Visions of England, an otherwise scarce book, still remains to me through the vicissitudes of 17 years of sale, purchase and exchange, and I would not care to part with it. I have over 200 volumes of that inestimable and incomparable series, the Temple Classics, besides several hundred assorted volumes of various other series. And when I heard of the new Everyman's Library, projected by that benefactor of bookmen, Mr. J. M. Dent, my first impassioned act was to sit down and write a postcard to my bookseller, ordering George Finley's The Byzantine Empire, a work which has waited 60 years for popular recognition. So that I cannot be said to be really antagonistic to cheap reprints. Strong in this consciousness, I beg to state that cheap and handy reprints are all very well in their way, which is a manner of saying that they are not the alpha and omega of bookishness. By expending £20 yearly during the next 5 years, a man might collect in cheap and handy reprints all that was worth having in classic English literature. But I, for one, would not be willing to regard such a library as a real library. I would regard it as only a cheap edition of a library. There would be something about it that would arouse in me a certain benevolent disdain, even though every volume was well printed on good paper and inoffensively bound. Why? Well, although it is my profession in life to say what I feel in plain words, I do not know that in this connection I can say what I feel in plain words. I have to rely on a sympathetic comprehension of my attitude in the bookish breasts of my readers. In the first place, I have an instinctive antipathy to a series. I do not want the Golden Legend and the Essays of Elia uniformed alike in a regiment of books. It makes me think of conscription and barracks. Even the noblest series of reprints ever planned, not at all cheap either, nor heterogeneous in matter, the Tudor translations, faintly annoys me in the mass. Its appearances in a series seems to me to rob a book of something very delicate and subtle in the aroma of its individuality, something which, it being inexplicable, I will not try to explain. In the second place, most cheap and handy reprints are small in size. They may be typographically excellent, with large type and opaque paper. They may be convenient to handle. They may be surpassingly suitable for the pocket and the very thing for travel. They may save precious space where shelf room is limited. But they are small in size. And there is, as regards most literature, a distinct moral value in size. Do I carry my audience with me? I hope so. Let Paradise Lost be so produced that you can put it in your waistcoat pocket, and it is no more Paradise Lost. Milton needs a solid octavo form, with stoutish paper and long primer type. I have Walpole's Letters in Newnes's thin paper classics, a marvellous volume of near 900 pages, with a portrait and a good index and a beautiful binding for 3 and 6, and I am exceedingly indebted to Messrs. Newnes for creating that volume. It was sheer genius on their part to do so. I get charming sensations from it, but sensations not so charming as I should get from Mrs. Paget Toynbee's many-volumed and grandiose edition, even aside from Mrs. Toynbee's erudite notes and the extra letters which she has been able to print. The same letter in Mrs. Toynbee's edition would have a higher aesthetic and moral value for me than in the editionlet of Messrs. Newnes. The one cheap series which satisfies my desire for size is Macmillan's Library of English Classics, in which I have the travels of that mythical personage, Sir John Mandeville. But it is only in paying for it that you know this edition to be cheap, for it measures 9 inches by 6 inches by 2 inches. And in the third place, when one buys series, one only partially chooses one's books. They are mainly chosen for one by the publisher. And even if they are not chosen for one by the publisher, they are suggested to one by the publisher. Not so does the genuine bookman form his library. The genuine bookman begins by having specific desires. His study of authorities gives him a demand, and the demand forces him to find the supply. He does not let the supply create the demand. Such a state of affairs would be almost humiliating, almost like the parvenu who calls in the wholesale furnisher and decorator to provide him with a home. A library must be, primarily, the expression of the owner's personality. Let me assert again that I am strongly in favour of cheap series of reprints. Their influence, though not the very finest, is indisputably good. They are as great a boon as cheap bread. They are indispensable where money or space is limited, and in travelling. They decidedly help to educate a taste for books that are neither cheap nor handy, and the most luxurious collectors may not afford to ignore them entirely. But they have their limitations, their disadvantages. They cannot form the backbone of a proper library. They make, however, admirable embroidery to a library. My own would look rather plain if it was stripped of them. The philosophy of book buying. For some considerable time I have been living, as regards books, with the minimum of comfort and decency, with, in fact, the bare necessaries of life, such necessaries being, in my case, sundry dictionaries, Boswell, an atlas, Wordsworth, an encyclopaedia, Shakespeare, Whitaker, some de Maupassant, a poetical anthology, Verlaine, Baudelaire, a natural history of my native county, an old directory of my native town, Sir Thomas Browne, Poe, Walpole's Letters, and a book of memoirs that I will not name.